One of the biggest things that I feel really impedes our confidence as teachers is feeling this need to do more in our classes, to be more, to add more variety. I want to bring more interesting cues. I want to bring more variety to my poses, to my sequences, to the things that I say, to what I offer. Now, all of those things I think are needed. There's a time and a place for them, and I think it's very honorable for you to have the intentions to continuously improve what it is that you offer for the benefit of your students. However, the one thing that we seem to be missing when it comes to the feeling and the desire that we have to want to add variety or add these extra things is that we neglect to acknowledge where that's coming from. We neglect to acknowledge first and foremost what is driving that desire. What is our motivation for wanting to create a change, for wanting to enhance or elevate some aspect of our teaching. Now, I hear this all the time. Oh, how do I add variety to my classes? How do I add variety to my cues? How do I feel like I'm just saying the same thing over and over again? Now, this can definitely sometimes encourage our self-doubt and make us kind of go, oh, well, I'm saying the same thing over and over again, and I need to change it because it's not good, right? But what first needs to happen before we make the change is to look at what is fueling that. And before we get into that, I want to say just a little word on the value of consistency. So if you feel that you need to constantly entertain your students, that you have to always bring something new and something different, I know that depending on the place that you're teaching, and this might be the expectation of the students. However, if you feel that that's what you need to do all the time, just remember that sometimes we are creating almost like an overstimulation reliance, where our students are like dependent and they rely on being overly stimulated in a class all the time, meaning they're constantly wanting to be entertained. So this is just something to be aware of. Like, are you constantly feeding your students something so they're always stimulated, always stimulated? There is so much value in, just for lack of a better word, the mundane and the consistency of something. So this is also something, before we dive into the next part of this video, is just to acknowledge and look at, okay, I can see the value of consistency. Me personally, I taught a practice and practice to practice that literally had the exact same poses for so many years, over and over and over and over again. And now I'm not saying that that type of repetition is great for you. However, what I did see was that so many students really were able to observe the changes that were taking place for them because they had a platform that was very consistent. Again, the same poses all the time. I'm not saying to do the same thing all the time, but if we're constantly throwing different bits in to stimulate our students and different ways to entertain them and to hold their attention, then, like I mentioned before, we are likely going to be overstimulating them, and then they're not truly dropping in and connecting in to just sitting with themselves, but also they might not actually be able to identify where a change is coming from, where the transformation is being fueled by. Is there something that they're doing in their practice that's working? Is there something that they're doing in their practice that's not working? If they have some consistency, then this actually allows them to have a platform to view change upon. So I just wanted to share that little side note about the value of consistency, especially if you're finding that, oh, my students are bored or I'm bored, and you're trying to spice things up. Just always remember to come back to the value of some form of consistency. And I'm not saying to just repeat the same thing all the time exactly in the exact same way. No, I'm not saying that. But just understand that there is value in consistency, and it's just you finding where that plays a part and where maybe it's worth changing sometimes. So as we move on to this next part of the video, I did want to share with you just a story of a teacher that I was working with, that I was mentoring. And she did say to me, I really need to add variety into my classes. Like, how do I do that? Can you give me some ways that I can spice things up a little bit? And I could have given her a whole bunch of stuff. But what the most impactful way to go about this was for me to ask her, well, where is this coming from? Why do you think you need to add variety into your classes? And she had to really think about that. And what she ultimately came up with was, I actually don't know. I mean, initially she said, oh, well, you know, my students, I just think like it's boring what I'm teaching over and over again. And I said, well, are your students bored or are you bored? And what she concluded was that it was her that was bored. And so it's really important when we actually look at these things, we understand the reasoning and the motivation and the fuel for why we want to make a change, because this will definitely encourage us to feel more confident and sure of what we're doing. If we're just making a change and we don't know why, well, then that's not really a deep, firm understanding, and that's a little bit rocky. So if we want to have that understanding and that self-assurance, we need to understand why we want to make a change. So some of the things that you can ask yourself when you feel like, I need to spice things up, I need to add different cues, I need to do this in a different way, I need to do a different sequence. And when you feel perhaps like you're feeling a little bit insecure or unsure about what it is that you're delivering and that you want to add something more, you can ask yourself any of these questions here. Have my students been appearing as though they're disengaged and they're just not listening anymore? They're going on autopilot, they're tuning out, they're checking out. Do they not do what it is that I am guiding them to do? Have my students expressed to me that my classes are boring? Have my students expressed and given me feedback that they want something more from me? Maybe you're seeing a gap in their practice and you're like, oh, I can see that they really need XYZ, but we're not doing that. So I'm going to start to deliver and make this change here. Do they seem really disinterested? They've expressed that they want to know more about this thing, so I'm going to deliver on that. So again, these are student-led things. These are led by your students that motivate you to then go and make the change. But if it's none of those things and it's not student-led at all, then you need to start looking at, well, where this is obviously coming from me. Is it because I feel inadequate? Is it because I don't feel good enough? Is it because I feel like I'm not an impressive teacher? Is it because I feel like I need to know more? I'm comparing myself to someone else? Is it because I'm bored? I'm bored of what I'm saying? And none of these are right or wrong. They're just simply things that I noticed have come up for teachers that I've mentored and myself along the way. And it's just a simple matter of you looking at these things and observing and going, oh, okay, that's where that's coming from. Because once you know where it's coming from, then you can confidently move and steer yourself in the direction that you need to address that. And sometimes you might realize, oh, wow, that's actually just me. That's actually me, and I'm feeling like I lack confidence in myself, and I'm going to sit with that. And you can go back to the previous videos before this one here, and you can reflect. And you can see what's coming up for you, and you can feel into whatever emotion is behind that, and you can observe, where is that coming from? Is that perpetuating, or is that running this narrative of a false core belief that I have about myself? So if it is some of those things, as I said, go back to those earlier videos in this course and let yourself work through some of those things. Now, if it isn't, and it is student-led, or it is rather just a desire on your part, like, I really want to learn about these things, I care about this, I think it matters, and therefore you want to integrate them and implement them into your teaching because that helps your learning process, that is appropriate as well. So it really does just depend on your motivation, what your motivation is for wanting to make these changes, recognizing, is it coming from a feeling of self-doubt or lack? Or is it coming from an abundance? Like, I want to, I really feel that it's important to share this because this is needed from my students. So these are things that are going to be very helpful for you to continue guiding yourself down that path of self-confidence and self-assurance. So the final thing that I would like for you to take away from this is that adding variety and having new skills and everything like that, this is great. It is not something that is bad or wrong. It is purposeful. However, it needs to be first looked at as to where it's coming from. What is the source of that? Is it for enhancing something and adding more value? Or is it because you want to avoid feelings of inadequacy or not feeling good enough, or that kind of imposter syndrome? So really get true with yourself and reflect on where these desires for change are coming from. And then from there, you can move forward with what it is that you need to do in order to feel more self-assured as a teacher and to continue bringing value to your students.